It is 6:30 p.m., June 15th, 2022. This meeting is live streamed and recorded, and information about our YouTube channel can be found on the district website. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Les, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Then can you please call roll?
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Here.
Shannon Hawes.
Here.
Les Green is here. Zach Dorhold. Here. Al Dahlgren.
Here.
Natalie Copeland.
Here.
Scott Andreasen.
Here.
The following cabinet members and staff are present at the District Administration Office. Superintendent Willie Jett. Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam. Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Mike Rivard. Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalarud. Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch. Executive Director of Research, Assessment, and Enrollment, Donna Roper. Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji. Media Technicians, Paul Novak and Gordy Scott. Custodian on site is Steve Hain. The following cabinet members and staff are virtually present. Director of Community Engagement and Communications, Tammy DeLand, whose virtual hologram is out in the audience right now. Director of Equity Services, Ayan Omar. Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm. Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations, Tracy Flynn Bowe. Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education, Carol Potter. And Executive Assistant, Jan McGuire.
Thank you. Now I'm looking for approval of tonight's Board of Education meeting agenda.
So move.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Scott, a second by Natalie. Dr. Green, can you please call roll?
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Al Dahlgren.
Yes.
Zach Dorhold. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Thank you. The consent agenda is next. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of minutes of the May 4th, 2022 and May 18th, 2022. Item B, approval of bills and other financial transactions for the grand total amount of $3,628,430.34. Item C, approval of personnel staff changes. Item D, acceptance of grant awards and donations. Item E, resolution of the School Board of Independent School District Number 742, St. Cloud Area Schools, Minnesota, the district, approving the sale of the district's general obligation facilities maintenance bonds, Series 2022B, the bonds, to the purchaser thereof, determining the form and details of such bonds, authorizing the execution, delivery, and registration of such bonds, providing the payment of and the security for such bonds, and authorizing and ratifying certain other documents and actions in connection therewith. And item F, Catherine Johnson Education Center project change orders totaling $14,127.02. Does any board member wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Please don't make it E, and I have to read that again. Okay, looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
So move.
And do I have a second? I have a motion by Scott and a second by Zach. Dr. Green, can you please call roll?
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Zach Dorhold. Yes. Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Les Green is yes, Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next, tonight we have one informational item. It's the 10-year long-term facilities maintenance plan presented by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, Superintendent Jett, members of the board. We are here looking at our annual, not approval, but information to the board. The approval will come back to the board in July. It is required to be approved and submitted to the Department of Education by the end of July. So we'll start out just as a recap for board members, an overview of the long-term facilities maintenance, also known as LTFM program, revenue. So the revenue is set by legislature. It is a combination of aid and levy. The majority of it does come in the form of levy. And this current LTFM program, for those who have been on the board for a long time, may recall the previous alternative facilities, deferred maintenance and health and safety levies. These kind of took the place of that and was a new program established by the legislature. There are kind of three general categories of allowable uses. They can be used to increase school accessibility, so ADA-related projects. A good example of that is the elevator we did at McKinley last year. So that is an allowable use. Any sort of approved health and safety expenditures, and those still align with the old health and safety law in terms of what's allowable within health and safety, and that's set by statute. And then the third is the broad category, and where the majority of the funds get spent. And the definition is eligible projects necessary to prevent further erosion of facilities. So really pretty broad in terms of general upkeep, anything that extends the useful life of a building. The few caveats with that, it has to be a district-owned facility. So if we're renting space somewhere, we're not allowed to utilize LTFM funds to make leasehold improvements on someone else's property. There's no remodeling allowed. You can't use it to add on square footage or do any sort of new construction. Next, we'll look at the proposed 2023-24 budget. And so there's a few components of the LTFM budget. There's the annual expenditures known as the pay-as-you-go expenditures. That budget is proposed at $8 million. That is the same as what the budget was for the previous year. And then there's debt service portions. So the first line there for debt service is just under 2.8 million. That's the existing debt service. That's been part of our annual LTFM approval for a number of years. That was the bonds that were issued in 2015 to cover HVAC projects at a number of district sites. And then you see the new debt service payments. That is the new bond that the board approved to issue $15 million to fund the remaining HVAC projects at Oak Hill, Discovery, and the remainder of Apollo. And so you see that we have the proposed LTFM revenue at the total of those three numbers, which is $11,927,622. The recommendation of Finance Committee was to keep the pay-as-you-go expenditures the same. You may recall when we did the bond issuance that there's a number of options there. We can leave the pay-as-you-go the same and have that new debt service result in a slight tax increase, or we can lower that pay-as-you-go amount. Again, Finance Committee recommended leaving that the same. The tax impact on the issuance for a $200,000 house is just over $21 per year, and that assumes zero increase in tax capacity. If we add in a 5% increase in tax capacity, which is what our average has been the last 3 years, that really negates and wipes out that full increase and makes that a tax neutral increase. In addition, we are expecting that we'll have declines in other portions of the general fund levy, primarily due to enrollment adjustments, and so that would also offset that increase, even if there's a lower than 5% tax capacity. So that is the recommendation from Finance Committee, is to leave that annual expenditure amount the same, which would result in the amount that you see in front of you. And then we'll quickly go through what we have identified as the 2023-24 projects. The majority of these get completed in the summer of '23, so not this summer, but next summer. And then you'll notice this year that we have a few site-specific identified projects and the vast majority of the funding in district-wide allocations. Just with some of the recent staffing shortages in our buildings and grounds department, and having some new staff and trying to have some additional time to identify site-specific needs. We've identified, based on the 10-year plan that we had done in 2020, a few of the kind of next level priority projects, and those have been identified in front of you. The biggest of those, excuse me, being the Apollo roof. And that is the B wing at Apollo. That roof is in critical need in terms of where our repairs are at, and so that is scheduled. The Apollo tennis courts need resurfacing, north window replacement, south lockers, and then looking at the retaining wall at McKinley. And then Westwood restrooms. Those are the site-specific projects at this point. The rest of what you'll see are district-wide allocations for kitchen equipment, paving projects, and then another number of other areas, whether that be lighting replacement, HVAC repairs, concrete, flooring, painting, those cosmetic sorts of repairs. And then we do have funds in unallocated as well. Are there any questions on either the amount that we intend to submit for our LTFM with the pay-as-you-go amount, or the projects, or both?
At the beginning, you were talking about 3 different categories, the second one being health and safety. Does that include secure entrances?
It does not. So the secure or controlled entrances is not an allowable LTFM expenditure. Health and safety is very specific, and so safety and security don't really fall under the health and safety statute. It's very specific to asbestos, indoor air quality, fire safety, and a few other categories, but they're very specific. They're all dictated by statute, and technologies, security, surveillance, all of those sorts of costs are not allowable.
Okay, you mentioned Apollo roof. Eventually, we hope to get a bond through. Would that result in any damage to this roof we're doing now?
It would not. A-wing also at Apollo is in need of replacement. We're holding off on A-wing because that, with the current architectural plans from the last referendum, would have some impacts in terms of penetrating back through a brand new roof that we wouldn't want to do. And the repairs on A-wing are not as critical or as substantial as what we're seeing in B-wing. So we feel comfortable putting that one on hold for a little bit longer. But B-wing, we have confirmed with the architects that there's no concern with doing that now.
Has there been any idea when they're going to do a bond? How many years do we have to keep going on this?
Don't think that's a me question. I think that's a board decision that that will, I would assume, be a topic of conversation in the future.
Thank you.
Al?
Just going to say that I'm going to support it, but one of the things we talked about in Finance Committee was during the past bond referendum for Tech High School, and how from the community the message was very clear that they do not want us to wait on maintaining our properties but they really want us to take care of the properties so that we, and it was under, at that time, it was under the name deferred maintenance, which kind of indicated to the community that we were deferring maintenance to do at a later date. And the message was real clear to just do the maintenance when you need to do the maintenance. And this budget allows us to stay current on it. And to me, to cut the long-term facilities maintenance budget because of a project, a special project that we're doing, doesn't make a lot of sense anyway, because then you do start to get behind, and then it's really hard to catch up. So to be able to continue, we've tackled the LTFM monster that was out there, and we've done a really good job, and the schools look great. They look great inside and out, and I think we want to keep that going forward. So I will support it.
I agree with hearing that message from the community. Any other comments, questions? Okay, Amy's going to roll on to the next one. Next up is an action item. We have approval of the 2021-22 revised budget. Go ahead, Amy.
Okay, so we are not going to spend a lot of time on this because we spent a fair amount of time at the last meeting going over the revised budget, and then the next item also the budget for next year. I will quickly run through just a recap of what the budget adjustments are for, since that's technically what we're approving is the revisions in the general fund, and then both the food service and community service fund. Those adjustments are all increases to revenue that are directly COVID and COVID funding related. So for both the general fund, general and operating capital portions of that, as well as community services, those are specific COVID-related federal grants. And then food service is a budget adjustment to reflect the increase in the meal participation and the revenue coming in based on meals being free for all. You will see when we get to the next slide and we look at the expenditure adjustments that those basically for those funds mirror very closely those same amounts because when we have the federal revenue coming in, we have federal expenditures offsetting them. The only two other funds that have adjustments are the building construction and the debt service fund, and both of those are the bond proceeds that the board approved previously. So the building construction fund is the bond proceeds coming in for the HVAC project bond issuance, and then the debt service proceeds is the refunding that the board approved. On the expenditure side, again, the general fund, food service, and community service, those amounts are identical in some cases or very close to the revenue adjustments that we just looked at. And then smaller budget adjustments in the building construction and debt service fund. Building construction is to reflect some of those additional projects, particularly the landscaping and some of the other items that the board authorized out of the remaining funds left over from the 2017 tech bond. And then the debt service is just to reflect the issuance costs on the bond refunding. So then here's a summary of all of the funds showing where our fund balances were at as of the last close of audit, which would have been the end of 2021 with the budget revisions, and then where we would project the fund balance to be for each fund as of 6/30/22. And you can see all of our funds representing healthy fund balances projected at the end of the year. Are there any questions on the 21-22 revisions?
Monica?
Hi, Amy. So I got a question today that maybe you can help me answer. I couldn't. So they told the question was about an advocate that was asking me to call the legislation and tell them how much we had been cut because they didn't go to a special session after they have come to agreements about the things that they were going to give to education. So can you answer that question?
So I would say that there's nothing that we have to cut for us as a district because we have the significant amount of ESSER funding. So not every district has that, that cushion, if you will, to be able to support. We all know that when the ESSER funding goes away, we looked at the last meeting, we have a $12 million still cross subsidy for special education and a $3.8 million cross subsidy for EL. So certainly, when the reality that of the ESSER funds goes away, we'll be back to, not necessarily needing to make reductions, but kind of where we were pre-COVID in having needs that we just don't have sufficient funding to meet. Our hope is that with food going back, our biggest loss of revenue was on the compensatory, and we are hopeful that we'll pick that compensatory back up for 23, 24, with the meals going back to being the regular nutrition program next year.
Al, and then Dr. Green.
I was just going to say, I don't think that any school districts would have had to cut anything based on this past legislative session, because it was funds that they were going to allocate in addition to, so they really weren't budgeted. So it was, it wasn't a budget biennium year, it wasn't a budget year, so they shouldn't have to cut based on that. It would have been additional funds that we would have received.
Yeah, I think there were some districts who didn't receive ESSER funding who had already made cuts, who were hopeful that if the state came through with new money, they'd be able to add
Right.
back some of the things that they had to cut.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Dr. Green?
Just an informational question. Prices are rising rapidly as I purchase gas and other things like that, and look at $200 fill-up bills for that monster truck of mine. But is that going to impact? We've approved a budget that didn't really it didn't anticipate this kind of cost. Have you thought of? I'm assuming you've thought about it. So what do you think will happen?
So we do factor in what we expect, knowing that the budget was completed, the revenue and the finalization of the budget was May, kind of mid-May. So we had already started to see some of those increases and have factored some of those in. Certainly, we're still utilizing ESSER funds to balance out the budget, particularly with the loss of compensatory. However, that is factored in because we know that that's a reality. And if costs continue to increase beyond what we're going to receive new funding for, then at some point when the ESSER funds go away, then that is a matter of looking at that prioritization of resources. Transportation is the biggest. We're fortunate that a big portion of our transportation budget is special education transportation, and that is reimbursed at 100%. So those costs that we see on the transportation side, we do actually have a venue to recognize revenue for the transportation piece. That's where we're seeing in the budget the biggest cost increase is in the transportation because of fuel. But certainly those costs increases are all over the place. I think a lot of districts, to Monica's point, we're hopeful that the state would give some new money in an off year where people aren't necessarily in the midst of negotiations to be able to offset some of that. But we do have the costs factored in. And then when we get to a point where we don't have the additional funding, then we'll determine if there needs to be reductions.
Okay, thank you.
Al, and then Monica.
Oh,
So I lost my train of thought. So you were saying that so when we lose those lesser fundings, that's not going to be during this budget year, right? We still have lesser fund the whole year, and then the next year we will have a new budget, and it will be a new legislation budget year,
Right, and we'll still actually have the ESSER funds in that next year as well. There will still be ESSER funds for 23, 24, in addition to whatever new money is appropriated by the state during the legislative session. But we also know that we'll have contracts expired and we'll be having bargaining units who are negotiating new contracts. And so certainly, a large portion, if not all, historically of the formula increase has gone to support those contract increases. So that will all be to come. But again, fortunate that we have those ESSER funds to support one more year after this budget.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the 2021-2022 revised budgets.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Al and a second by Monica. Dr. Green, can you please call roll?
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Zach Dorhold. Yes. Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Scott Andreasen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Amy, next we have you're looking for the approval of the 2022-23 budget.
Yes, and we'll quickly, again, not going to go over all of the numbers, just a quick recap on the budget amounts that are being approved. The general fund you see on the screen, again, is comprised of operating, transportation, and operating capital, expecting to end the year with just over $24 million in fund balance. We have two special revenue funds, food service and community education. Our food service budget for next year reflects going back to sort of a business as usual with a combination of fees from families, federal and state revenues, as opposed to our current fully federal funded, all for free. And then community education budget very consistent with previous years. Capital Projects Fund and Debt Service Fund always look a little bit strange because we see deficit spending, which is to be expected. We had bond issuances coming in the 21-22 revised budget that was just approved, and so we're spending down a portion of that in the next fiscal year, with those being summer 23 projects, and then the remainder of those proceeds will be spent down in 23-24. And then the debt service fund is a little bit unusual. We don't typically see deficit spending in that fund. The reason for that is because the bond that was refinanced is an advance refunding, which means that the bond we're paying off wasn't callable and able to be paid off yet. And so those funds will sit in an escrow account with the payments coming out of the escrow account, which is why you see the deficit until the call date, which I believe is 2026. So we'll see some deficit budgets in that fund for the next few years. And then we have 3 internal service funds to track our insurance, and all of those sitting with very healthy fund balances, and we'll get more information on those coming up, I believe in July, when we look at where we're at and with the rate increases. Are there any questions on the 22-23 budget?
No questions, comments?
Comment.
Al?
I'll make a comment. I'll just say thanks, Amy. It was a lot of work to build a budget. And it was actually a very good budget, and it's one that's sustainable going forward. Many districts throughout the state are in a position where they used funds that they don't have sustainability, and there's a cliff coming, and they're going to go head first over that cliff without any funds to pay for it. But yet, in this district, we've maintained a budget that we can continue to operate, and we're not facing that fiscal cliff even after the COVID funds dry up. So a lot of work went into it, but it's a good budget. It's sustainable. So at this point, I would move that we approve the 2022-2023 budget.
Second.
We have a motion by Al and a second by Monica. Any further discussion? Dr. Green, can you please call roll?
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes,
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Zach Dorhold.
Okay, last one for Amy here. Meal prices for the 2022-23 school year.
Okay, on the screen and also in your board agenda packet is a comparison of, and I want to emphasize that these are all proposed prices for surrounding districts. At least as of a week ago when we were putting this together, none of these districts had actually had their boards approve them yet, but this is what was being brought forward as recommendations. Both Sauk Rapids and Rocori don't have specific pricing listed, although talking with both of those districts, they both intend to do an increase, either 5 to 10 cents, somewhere in that range, but both are going to be recommending some sort of increase. So you'll see our proposed pricing reflects a 10-cent increase in lunch across the board. So that's elementary, secondary, and adult. And so prices really end up very comparable with our surrounding districts. As a percent, that ends up being about a 3.6% increase for elementary, about 3.3% for secondary. And our food costs, I connected with Cisco, who's our food service vendor. Our food costs, primarily in terms of our market segment, have seen upwards of a 10% increase in the last year, and expecting to have another 6 to 7% in cost increases going into by fall, by the end of 2022. So certainly we know that there's a reality of having increased costs within our food service program. The USDA did this year set kind of a target price. Now, again, that's a nationwide target price, and so we know costs can vary from region to region, but their target price is set at $3.31 based on rising food costs. So we are still quite a bit below that, but again, comparable with surrounding districts. So that is the recommendation. This went to Board Finance Committee. There is no recommendation to increase anything with breakfast. We are kind of in the mid-range of breakfast. A number of the surrounding districts don't charge for breakfast. But we're comfortable in terms of our breakfast food costs and where our price point is, leaving those the same, and then the same for milk. So that is the recommendation. Are there any questions?
Scott?
For the past year or two, we've been giving free lunches. And are those free lunches continuing to some extent, or is it done, or what do we got?
So the free lunches for all families with no need to apply is done. Those waivers have expired. There's been clear communication from USDA that there is no extension of that. And so there is still the option, of course, for families to fill out the application for educational benefits to receive the free or reduced meals. So really kind of the same, back to the same process we were at pre-COVID.
Sounds good. We'll get our compensatory monies back up then.
That is the goal.
Are the income guidelines for the qualifying for free meals, is that every year that's looked at?
Yes, so USDA establishes those, and they're typically printed in the application. The application isn't out yet, but those are established at the national level.
Okay, but it's a annual?
Yes, they're adjusted annually.
Okay, and remind me again, we used to have a reduced tier, we don't have that anymore, and what happened to that tier?
So we do still have a reduced tier for lunch, I believe, or maybe we don't. It has been a long time since we've been paid.
Do we have, where it used to be like 40 cents for a lunch, or did that go away?
We do, because
For breakfast,
we do at
don't.
Finance Committee, it was reported how many free and then how many reduced, and it was a very small number of reduced.
Yeah, we have a
Okay.
pretty small reduced
Okay.
percentage. When we look at percents for free and reduced, they're usually combined, but the vast majority are in the free qualifier. I think historically we've had like 5 to 8% maybe in our reduced. Our reduced percents are really very small.
Okay, Thank
And
you.
then the state does fund the reduced price for breakfast. So breakfast is free whether you're free or reduced. That's a state funded. In addition, the state, a number of years ago, passed legislation to fund free meals for kindergarten. That is still in place too. So meals for kindergarten students will continue to be free for all students.
Amy, I think we've talked about this before, but I just have to ask. There's no way for, I'm thinking of the kids standing in the lunch line. There's no way for any kid to know if another kid is a free or reduced. I mean, it's not like there's a different way of getting a lunch if you're paying for a lunch versus if it's a free lunch, you're not identified differently.
Correct. Yep.
It's all,
Yep, all the students are served the same. There's no denial of meals. There's not even kind of that message of, oh, you don't have money, or you. The only time that we would have to indicate, and it would be the same as if you weren't a free student, is for a la carte, because whether you're in paid status and don't have money in your account, or you're on free or reduced status, a la carte is the one place where they're obviously turning people away and not letting them take the food if you don't have money. But that's the same process whether you're free, reduced, or full paid.
a free and reduced student can eat it a la carte.
They would have to have money in their account. Yep, the a la carte isn't
That's not
covered.
an option.
Right, you can't, there's no federal reimbursement for a la carte because the federal reimbursement has to tie to a reimbursable meal with all of the appropriate components and meets the meal requirements. So yeah, there is no funding mechanism for free or reduced students to purchase a la carte unless they use cash or put money in their account.
But staff know to not say to the child, tell your mother to put some money in the account.
Correct,
And
yep.
staff know not to go take a lunch away from a child.
Absolutely,
The
yep.
horror stories that you hear across the country.
Yeah, nope, the facilitators make note when a student comes through and there isn't money, and then they follow up with that family, whether it be a phone call or a letter. We have our automated calls, all of that happens after the meal service, behind the scenes.
That is very much appreciated. Thank you. Natalie?
So for Sauk Rapids and Rocori, how do they get by with free breakfast? Do they eat the cost? Is there a grant, or how do they do that?
So it's interesting that you asked that, because I actually have asked both of those districts that same question. Rocori has very low participation, and so because they serve so few meals, and they do pretty standard, easy grab and go things that they can have out while they're prepping for their lunches. And so for the small amount of people who are utilizing breakfast, the cost to serve those for free versus having to have a facilitator work to run through accounts, it balances out for them. Sauk Rapids does breakfast in the classroom and serves to all. Their business manager is relatively new, and I asked her that question, and she also is a little bit perplexed in how they afford it. She's only been there a year, but she said they have significant a la carte revenue in Sauk Rapids, and so her assumption is that the free breakfast is basically being floated by the a la carte revenue. But it's hard to say, every district budgets and does things differently. It could be that they're not charging back, utilities and overhead costs to the general fund, where other districts do, and that's, part of the equation. But certainly that's something that she said she'll be evaluating to determine if they can continue that or not, especially as food costs go up.
Monica?
So I don't know if this question is for you, Amy, but is there an opportunity during the year that we can revise this again? Or once it's approved for the whole year?
We typically approve it and set those for the year, just so that families know and it's predictable. That's not to say that we couldn't. There's nothing that's set in stone, but to my knowledge, we have never adjusted prices mid-year.
Any other questions or comments? And this is an action item.
I would move that we approve the meal prices as proposed for 22-22, or 2022-2023.
Second.
I have a motion by Al and a second by Scott. Any further discussion? Dr. Green, will you please call roll?
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Scott Andreasen,
Yes.
Zach Dorhold. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Natalie Copeland.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Next, we have a discussion item, comprehensive balanced approach to district-wide student assessment plan, presented tonight by Donna Roper, Executive Director of Research, Assessments, and Enrollment. Welcome, Donna. Nice to see you in person.
It's even hard to say comprehensive, balanced approach to assessment, isn't it? Well, it is my pleasure to be here this evening, sharing with all of you tonight some information about our comprehensive and balanced approach to a district-wide student assessment plan. As you know, we have policy 614 that came up for us to review, and it just so happened that we're in the third year of a 3-year contract with our star vendor. And so it's a perfect time for us to be taking a look at our assessments for that reason. And not only that reason, but with all that has happened the last couple of years with COVID, a lot has been uncovered in terms of, the limitations with just standardized testing. And so I'm going to try and share some of the rationale for why we would like to put forward a comprehensive and balanced approach to the next student district-wide assessment plan. And hopefully if you have questions, you'll ask, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first slide is just a quote that the National Research Council has put out around a balanced assessment system. And I just want to say this is not new. This is been around for a while, but I think until COVID hit, states and federal governments didn't realize how heavily school districts were relying on standardized data alone to tell them important things about what kids knew and could do. And so comprehensive and balanced assessment systems include a variety of different types of assessments which produce evidence that can be used both informatively to improve learning and evidence that can be used summatively, right, to certify or report out or evaluate the learning, okay? And I just want to make that distinction because a lot of what we do is the formative stuff, and it's very important. There are 3 other things I want to just touch on. One is the strategic plan, because our strategic plan does invite us to do this work as well. It invites us to strive for more equitable access to high-quality learning, and to do that, we need to have high-quality assessment. So we thought it would be good to just share that the strategic plan does guide us in this important work. Secondly, in the fall of this year, when this policy came up initially for review, I wanted to pause because the state of Minnesota had come out with some new guidance early in October around asking districts to do this review and to really look at how classroom assessment, how district-wide assessment and state assessment is aligned and how we are teaching the standards. The MDE even went so far as to change their name of their department. It was statewide testing. It's now academics, instruction, and assessment. Recognizing the importance of, making sure districts are not only doing those large summative, paying attention to only those, but also just helping classroom teachers get better at high quality assessment practices. And so that they also pushed, doing data literacy and assessment literacy with your teams. So, we want to look at our assessment plan. We want it to be comprehensive. We want it to be coherent and continuous and efficient and useful. And so again, you can kind of see the layers there. And then finally, the part that gets me really excited, obviously, is the research, right? And the science of learning. And so the National Research Council report, Knowing What Students Know, which has been around for quite some time, really crystallized that appeal for balanced systems of assessment. And so when we get this work going, we hope to share some of the research on this with our professionals, and I guarantee you many of them out in the field already know about this work, this seminal piece, and are already doing a lot of these really great things. Finally, I know this one is kind of a hard one to look at, but I thought this one would be important to just give you a sense of, the layers of assessment that are happening in a system. And we're coupling the research with basically the learning sciences and the learning theory. And what you'll notice on this graphic is that in the upper left-hand corner where there's learning theory, you see blue, green, and yellow, which means that what you believe about how kids learn, from the classroom teacher to, the department level people to the state level people, really matters. And you can see the orange and red bubbles on the flow chart and how they link back to the major unit work and then down to kind of the green major unit planning summative assessment work. These are all aligned to content standards and all directly linked to what we believe about how kids learn. And so I just wanted this to be a piece that we highlighted for you because it will be central to kicking off our work as a design team. With key questions about understanding what is taught, how it's taught, and how it's assessed. And so the policy that we are proposing sets forth this idea that we would develop a plan, which thankfully Executive Director Posh and I will be able to facilitate together, and I'm so excited to work in partnership with Lori and her team and all the teachers out there. This is just meant to give you an idea of how interested we are in collaborating with the professionals in our system who have great knowledge on this topic. And we would strive to have representation from not only the role areas, so teachers to instructional coaches, to include people with expertise in the specialty areas like special education, multilingual learners, folks that are expertised in literacy and in math and science, all of the disciplines, and representation from the different levels. And so while this may sound like a very large team of people, together, this collective will conduct a review process of all of our assessments. We are going to identify needs that we have. We're going to identify gaps in our understanding about use and purpose and fit of all of our assessments, and generally grow our collective learning together around the practices of assessment, which is really exciting. And so this is just a slide detailing for you kind of the different layers that we're going to look at as a design team, or that I would propose that we begin. We begin here. We don't end here, but this is a beginning because there are multiple layers. And what you'll take away on this slide, besides there's a couple of graphs showing state assessments at the top, similar to what we just were talking about earlier. The bottom figure of common assessments is going to require time for us to really vet our resources, develop high quality rubrics, proficiency scales, and just make sure that there's really confidence in these tools and these measures, so we really can say, with certainty, we know what kids know and can do. The other thing we're going to explore is just different types of assessments, performance assessments, for example. We know that the learning can be demonstrated in many different ways, and that as the tasks get more cognitively challenging, we have to use different methods. We can't always use multiple choice, for example. And then, our impact collectively around the learning, if you've heard of John Hattie, he's a famous researcher who's done much research in the area of things that are impactful, and he has a tagline called Know Thy Impact. And one piece of work that he's put out is that collective efficacy, teacher collective efficacy, is incredibly impactful to student learning. But what we know is it's not just teacher collective efficacy in and of itself, it's that fed by evidence of learning, good quality evidence of learning. And so the work that we're going to do with this design team is going to help us build up that bucket of evidence for our professionals so that they are really as impactful as we know they can be. Some of the key questions, and I'm not going to read through these, that this design team will grapple with are listed here. And I'm confident there will be many, many more, because we have a very talented group of teachers in this district. And so they will grapple with the questions. Our goal will be to provide an end product that is a district-wide assessment plan detailing out what we're assessing, when we're assessing, who's involved. It will answer all of the questions necessary to each of the stakeholders need to know about the assessment. And what I'm really excited about is that I think while this might feel a little bit like a top-down approach to assessment, there are going to be some added pieces that come out of it from the student lens up. So this work will drive building what I'm calling a comprehensive learner record, which I'm really excited about too. And there's many districts out there who are moving into the space of creating a more comprehensive learner record that includes things like performance assessments, like certifications and badges and those kinds of things, as well as the standardized tests and grades. So finally, I think all this work, the goal is just to systematically improve student learning. And I won't read that quote, you can read that, but we just believe that by purposefully developing our assessment plan, that we will be able to have an impact on student learning. There you have it. Questions?
Monica?
Hi, Donna, nice to have you here. Can you talk a little bit more about what do you mean by evidence of learning? Like when you, those buckets that you were talking about, like, can you give us examples about that? Can you explain that a little bit more, please?
So I think when we talk about data with our educators, oftentimes we want to make sure that we are understanding the difference between a data point and a collection of data and information that forms evidence. It's very rare that you would just look at one piece of data to make any kind of a decision. You would look at a collection of data, and I'm calling that evidence of learning, right? So does that answer your question?
I think it answers my question, but also shows me that I didn't understand what you were saying at that point. So could you make your point again, please?
So assessment in and of itself, the process of assessment it's how we gather evidence of learning. So if you think of assessment as a process, it's a feedback loop, right? And it's how we gather data to inform decisions.
So your point there was that, okay, can you repeat the point again? So it was something about the students learning, but it is the assessment plus the evidence of learning. No. It might come back to me. So I have another question. When you were talking about the district-wide assessment design team, was looking at the roles and the specialty areas and all of the things that you have here. And I wonder how do we have assessment, or how do we evaluate things like soft skills, arts. I don't see arts here. I don't see anything about arts here. There is something that says fine arts, but as a discipline.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure if we are evaluating what the discipline is as a discipline, like is different to evaluate math and aptitude to math. And I just wonder about those same things. But how are we seeing the student more balanced in terms of content, being prepared, and being knowing about content is one thing. Being prepared for learning more, which is another thing. Also, being developed as a person that is going to be in a society. So that has to do more with other things. And I see that there are psychologists here, and or there is something else here, that school psychologists and stuff like that. So how do we look, or what this is what you're hoping to be looking at, or?
So that was an example. It was meant to just help the board understand that we do intend to involve the folks with the expertise in the areas as we go through this process. So your question about soft skills, I mean, we know that collaboration and communication and some of these have already been defined, and teachers are working with learners on those. And the design team will develop how we will measure and in those areas, and that would be the work of the design team. So I don't have any answer for you of what it is, because I think that's going to bubble up from the work that we do with this design team.
So is this completely new? And different? How?
I would say we have an assessment plan that is very heavy in one area. So we're trying to balance it out and get the broader picture. We know that there's more to it, right? So all of the state and federal required testing, we will still do. That is still a part of this plan. It doesn't go away. It's in there, it's included. But we are going to review our district measures. We are going to try to understand the value they add. Do they meet the needs? Do we need other things? Those are going to be the kinds of things that we tackle in this design team.
And how long would this take?
So the work is never done. I'm going to put that out there right now. But we do have a target date of getting a biennial plan in your hands before the 23-24 school year. So we have this upcoming year to do some pretty heavy lifting to get a biennial plan going. But I think I've shared with people that this is going to be work that this will never be done. It'll be constantly evolving, and we will continue to do it and get better at it and adapt as we go, as the needs change.
Thank you.
Al, and then Dr. Green.
So you can chalk these questions up to the fact that I'm an amateur when it comes to this stuff, but it seems to me and maybe this is what you're saying, I don't know. Maybe I didn't hear what you were saying. But when it comes to assessment, there's different types of assessment. One is, how is the student doing compared to the statewide standards or how is the student doing compared to what the state says they should be capable of doing? And I assess them and I say, you might be at the 60% level of where the state says that you should be right now. And some students are far above and some students are far below. Then there's the question of, why does a student fall where they fall? So there's another assessment that needs to be done. And why is a student only achieving at the 40% level when they've been given all of the same opportunities as a kid that's performing at the 90% level? So how, we need to assess that child and determine, why isn't it clicking? Why aren't they grasping this information and running with it? Why aren't they interested in it? And a lot of that would go to assessing their social emotional needs and any trauma that they've experienced in their life that's causing them to not be able to get up into that top of the pyramid on, what's his name? Maslow, yeah, Maslow's pyramid. They're not up there. They're down here in the survival mode, and we're giving them the same information, but it's going in one ear and out the other, because they're not worried about that. They're worried about something else. There's an assessment that needs to be done to determine where a kid is socially and emotionally and how capable they would be of receiving information as it's presented to them. And then it would be the connection of those two coming together, that you're giving the kid the proper social emotional supports along with the proper learning supports, so that the kid can take on that information and make sense of it in their head and get out of the lower levels of that pyramid and up to the top. That, to me, that would seem like the assessments that we would need in the schools to. And
Would you like to be on the team? No, just kidding.
no,
But you did a really nice job of.
I sell kids socks for a living.
But no, I think you know a lot. You shared really good information there, and I think that'll be similar information we hear from our teacher teams, is that we have SEL needs, and how do we get after that? And maybe we need an assessment for that, and we'll find out. But that's the kind of stuff that these experts are going to help us flush out.
Dr. Green?
Al answered my questions.
Excellent. Natalie? And then Scott.
Al has found his new calling. Sorry, once upon a child. I loved the idea of 3 words you said. I think you just said collective efficacy, but can you expand on that? I know I looked up collective teacher efficacy, and that sounds super exciting. And then I'm also thinking about collective student efficacy. And translating that into the work that we've done with marketing in the district, and really making not just marketing, but who we are, and not allowing folks to tell us who we are, instead saying this is who we are and we love who we are. But maybe how will that teacher efficacy and student efficacy come into play here?
So I'll take a stab at this, but I bet Lori Posch and maybe even Dr. Putnam and Dr. Rivard have great answers to this question. And what I would say is that we're in a place where we probably can't solve all of the difficulties without teaming when it comes to making sure kids are learning, and our kids are coming in with wider variability in what they know and can do because, of COVID. So there's a benefit to doing this work together. And Hattie says teacher collective efficacy, it's a 1.57 effect size on learning. And 0.4 is the cut. So it's almost 3 times that, right? 4 times that. So doing the work of designing what we consider high quality, acquisition of learning, it can only be done by teachers. That's something is really difficult to automate, but it also has to be done in a team to get to that quality level. If I do it by myself, I don't know how good it is. I need feedback from my colleagues to do that. I don't know if that's the best explanation, but other people probably have better ones.
Always.
I think back to my education days and learning about collective efficacy. I think that the term actually started in community building, as in like cities and towns, and the premise that working together as a community created a stronger community. And I think it has some origins back in even like maintaining order within communities. So that's really pushing my brain back to classes. But when we think about it in schools, it's the we are stronger than I. And knowing that when we believe in that, when we believe in that collective power and strength, we can do wonders. And when we believe in that, our students achieve, is what Hattie found.
Yeah, that's what the part that I saw here for CTE, collective teacher efficacy, it says, a staff shared belief that through their collective action, they can positively influence student outcomes, including those who are disengaged or disadvantaged. And so that would maybe think of collective student efficacy, that they also believe, even though they may be disengaged or disadvantaged, that they can move forward. Yeah, it also brought me back to child psychology in college as well. So I was like, oh, efficacy, right? That makes sense. Thank you for expanding on that.
Scott, and then Dr. Green.
Do you approach assessing special ed kids differently than your run-of-the-mill kid? Do you have different testing programs, and how does they interrelate between your special ed kids and your, say, English language kids or the run-of-the-mill kid?
Yes, we have accommodations that we are required to honor when it comes to testing students or assessing students. And those accommodations get written into their IEPs or their 504s or their English language learning plan. And those are honored at the classroom level and also at the standardized testing level.
I'm thinking perhaps like dyslexia. How do you even test that when they get the words switched around and letters switched around?
Yeah, and I think, so dyslexia is kind of a specialty thing that, of course, we screen for reading struggles. We don't diagnose dyslexia here, I don't believe, but we do look for reading struggles. And kids can have extra supports written into their 504s and IEPs when they do have symptoms of dyslexia or dysgraphia or dyscalculia, I think is,
How does that impact your assessing, though?
I think we're pretty good at making those accommodations. And one of the other things we're going to tackle in this assessment design team is for what purpose are we assessing, right? And is it to compare the special ed kids to something other than, are they improving? Is it to compare the general ed? I mean, what are we doing? Are we comparing? Are we looking at getting better? So it depends. It depends on the measure, depends on the purpose. It depends on what your question you're trying to answer. So all of those things will be discussed and uncovered, and
If a kid doesn't read or write English, how do you assess?
maybe you assess them in their home language. If it's a subject that they can demonstrate knowledge and skill in, and you can do it in their home language, that's possible.
Two things. In the last few months, I've met a number of young people who might want to be involved in helping you create that plan. Since we're assessing students, it might be useful to have a rather extended conversation with them about what they think they're supposed to be doing and how that might help them. The other had to do with what Scott said about dyslexia, and this is really sort of strange, but I've seen a number of movies where the movie was trying to explain to the viewer what the kid was seeing. Kevin Hart was in night school, and they kept throwing up on the screen. One is what was on what he was supposed to be reading, and then the other was what he was seeing. And I don't know if our kids can do that. So it just seems to me that this is a prime place to step outside the world we have and get down with those students that took me on and ask them how they can help develop something to assess what they think we're trying to do. So that's all.
Appreciate that. I think self-assessment, students assessing their own work, is a really important component of assessment.
The design of it is what
and-
I'm suggesting.
And I'm open to that too, and I appreciate that.
Natalie?
After we celebrated retirement for some folks in our district, I decided to get Chipotle because why not? And suddenly Lori was behind me and said, "Hey, come over here. There's some kids to meet that you should meet." And so it was our Rising Teachers, what is it called again? Future Teacher Academy. And to see the efficacy, again, to go back to that, in themselves was beautiful. Like, I said, "What kind of teacher do you want to be?" And they're like, "I don't know if I want to be a teacher. I can do that if I want, but also what I'm thinking about is this, this, this." And there was so much belief in each kid that, I say kid, but most of them are graduated, that I was talking to, that they knew they had options and that they were going through this Future Teacher Academy that is already a beautiful program to begin with, because this is one avenue of success that they could go down. Not the avenue, not the only thing that they could do, but I was just really impressed with all of it. And there was a lot of kids. The first time I was there, I think we had 17 or something, and 13, and now they filled noodles. So it was beautiful to see them. Thank you, Lori.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Lori. Next, another discussion item. We have proposed revised Board Policy 504, first reading, student dress and appearance, presented by Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education.
Thank you, Chair Haas. Good evening. Good evening, Superintendent Jett, members of the board. Tonight we are here for the first reading of Board Policy 504, which is dress and appearance. Looking specifically at item D, as we've been discussing for some time now. And after our conversation our discussion at the last board meeting, we said that administration would come forward with a recommendation. So here you can see the recommendation from administration for your consideration. It reads that headgear for students in grades 6 through 12 may be worn during the school day, provided the head covering complies with other district policies and does not interfere with the learning environment. School administrators shall have sole discretion to determine whether head covering is disruptive to the learning environment and to direct students to remove headgear during the school day. So the part that I'd like to point out is that that the wearing of headgear doesn't interfere with the learning environment. So I know that there was a question about what if a student had their hood drawn tightly and you couldn't see their face. Well, that would be disruptive to the learning environment and doesn't comply with other of our code of conduct. And so that would be a reason that an administrator would say, you don't get to do this any longer, and address it that way. Certainly, our classroom teachers have the discretion to also address, does this disrupt my classroom? And they are the authority, the adult in that room, and they would be able to also direct that with the support of school administration if needed. So we believe that based on some of the caveats regarding compliance with other district policies and the interference with the learning environment, that this addresses the concerns that were brought forward.
Al?
Is it correct to say that school administrators shall have the sole discretion to determine whether, when you're saying you're giving that permission to the teachers, the classroom teachers, they are not the school administrators?
That would be as the final, right? So a classroom teacher, like any other behavior, right, has the right to say, put your phone away, stop poking your neighbor, right? Stop throwing a pencil. So they have that discretion, but the school administrator is the one that would then, if there is either a disagreement, Zach disagrees with what I as a teacher said, or if the student refuses to comply, that's when the school administrator would come in. It's the same thing with the rest of this policy regarding dress and appearance. So if a teacher has concern about what someone's wearing, that it doesn't comply with the rest of this policy, parts of bodies are hanging out that shouldn't be, they would say, hey, they have the right to say, hey, cover up, this is board policy. But it's the administrator, even in the rest of the policy, that's given that authority to say, you need to comply, or there are other options.
Natalie?
I had the same question as Al, and I'm just wondering, why would we call out? So the question that Al has, school administrators shall have the sole discretion. It reads to me like teachers don't have discretion, which I'm understanding you to saying that. Of course, that's not true. But why do we call that out in D where it's not called out in any other? This is like a line item of procedures, right, or of inappropriate clothing issues. So I'm just wondering why we have that second sentence there, but we don't have it in other places. And the other question I have is 6 through 12, how did I know we came up with that for the test subject, but then is that our thinking that it'll be 6 through 12 forever? Will we eventually go down to P through 12, or how was that decision made?
That came from our staff, the secondary staff, when they were surveyed and said what's going well, what's not. So our elementary staff have never said this is an issue. They don't have the same experiences, and Dr. Rivard could probably address that better than I can even. But that's the reason this came forward, was from them.
And it's a very short answer. Dr. Putnam's correct. We've never really had that brought forward as being a significant concern where teachers had to spend a lot of time working with kids on it.
I have Monica, then Al, then Dr. Green.
So can a teacher, with the policy the way that it reads now, can a teacher can say, no head covers in my class?
If it was disrupting the learning environment.
Only. They cannot make that rule.
Correct, because then it would be in violation of board policy, if this were to be approved.
Al?
Lori, I'm going to go back again to that. School administrators shall have sole discretion to determine. And I'm going to go back to, looking at, and I'm glad I did look at the raw data, because there were a lot of comments in there from teachers, and there was a lot of commonality in those comments. And I think that the main things that stuck out to me was that there's actually more of a problem with hats and hoods during passing time than there is during the classroom time. That students are hiding they're hiding in their hoods and then bullying and, smacking a kid in the hall, and the hall monitors and the teachers aren't able to identify that student quickly because they are all covered up. There was a number of comments on kids wearing ski masks since this policy was put into place, and that it's completely removing the ability of a teacher or attendant to be able to identify a student. And again, bullying concerns became they rose to the top in that. But I think by putting that line in there, the school administrators have the sole discretion. That means they're the only ones that can decide. They have the sole discretion. And that isn't what we're trying to say, you're saying. I mean, I think that a hall monitor should be able to say, hey, you got to remove that, or pull that hood back off of your face. But I think, couldn't we somehow put into policy too that you can't disguise your identity or hide your identity through the use of head coverings and, so that you can't wear a ski mask? That's not a hat or a hood.
That is not allowed.
Well, it's a hat.
It's not, right? Like, we do not allow that. And it's either in board policy somewhere or it's in our handbooks that you cannot cover up it's somewhere. I will find it for you. And I am totally open.
I would also bet that and where it's coming across as ski masks, maybe they're saying with COVID masks and a hood,
That could be, yeah.
They can't identify a student with just that much of their face showing. And somehow we need to incorporate that this can't be used to hide a student's identity. And
Absolutely.
that they have to be able to, and it has to give authority, and I feel like this takes the authority away from the teachers and away from the hall monitors. It has to give authority to the teachers and the hall monitors to make those decisions. And I think that this could be rewritten in a way that we could accommodate that, so that the teachers would feel more like this was written in their support, not to create a conflict within the classroom for which they have to bring in an administrator to make the sole decision.
I think that's good feedback, and we'll gladly take a look at it. I think the intention of it was to have that compound, right? The compound and to direct a student to remove headgear during the school day, right? So I think that we can clean that up and bring that back to see if we can address that concern. It's certainly not the intention.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Dr. Rivard, are you?
I don't know, Lori, if it helps, or Dr. Putt, if it helps at all, but as you look at Board Policy 506, it does spell out for your question, Al, who's responsible for what in those certain areas related to discipline, because 506 is our discipline policy. And it does get down to other school district personnel and how it does flow downwards, starting at the school board level and what people's responsibilities are. But I do recognize what you're saying with the sole discretion piece.
Dr. Green?
When I read that, it said to me that there may be a disagreement between a student and a teacher about whether or not what they're doing is disruptive, and that the person who would have the final determination of the decision was the administrator, as opposed to taking power away from it. It seemed to be providing a student with an avenue to say to a teacher or someone, you're wrong, this is not disruptive. And at least then they know who they could talk to. So that's how I read it, but I may have read it wrong. That's what I perceived.
Natalie and then Monica.
I think just in looking at it as a policy, if we look at, I think I kind of already said this, but if we look at everything else above it and below it, it is just saying this this is yes and this is no. And then we have all these flowcharts, which we saw some today of this is what teachers do, this is when administrators come in, so to like have this say something else just seems a little bit weird. Like, why would we have to have extra backup just on this one?
Thank you. Good feedback.
Monica?
I was just wondering, why did you just got to write what is in red instead of just saying D in the part that is that has a line over, instead of saying headgear including has blah 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 is not allowed in grades up to 5th grade. Just leave it the way that it was. Like, why is it necessary to say all the stuff that is in red?
That's a good question. I think it reflects some of the other language above, like when we're talking about, like when we're specifying like clothing that is lewd, vulgar, or obscene, right? It just kind of qualifies that. So, qualifying that headgear can be worn with the qualification that it complies with other district policies and doesn't interfere with the learning environment is why we put it there. Certainly, if this board's preference is that we use what was D and just make it the affirmative instead of the negative, we are open to that conversation. But that is why we had put it there. I think also in part because we've had such a lengthy discussion and we want to ensure that people understand that we have the full expectation that this does not interfere with the learning environment or cause harm to anybody else.
Zach?
Just wanted to point out how this is on par with many other districts who, for example, well, we'll go to 279. They have a very broad policy, but they list the building administrator has the authority. The principal, Fridley, the principal has the authority. Eden Prairie, the building administrator has the authority. So we're not treading any waters that don't exist already. So.
Zach has the authority to do what? To
Also, headgear, including hats and coverings, are allowed as determined by building. That is.
But we aren't saying that.
No, I'm saying we are in the
Building an
realm.
option.
I have 7 examples here. I could go on all night because they did a lot of research into this. I just wanted to point out, we are not alone by using that language of sole discretion as determined whether the school administrators. So they use building administrator, school administrator, and principal in several different districts. The verbiage is pretty similar, and some are just incredibly vague and allow a lot more than the administrator, like, can't even really read them, and then some is the principal. So we're a little bit in the middle, I'd say.
Mr. Jett?
Interesting conversation. And some of the rationale in some of those other districts, because you guys remember that I have worked in a lot of other districts, part of that is when it says sole responsibility, it gets to who is going to be the person to send you home, who is the person that's going to be the disciplinarian, who is the person that's going to enter the write-up. So the teacher does not have the ability to suspend you, to put you into detention, to things of that nature, out of school or in school suspension. And so there'll be a lot of districts when you see that sole piece, that is the rationale in terms of why they have that. I'm not saying we're supposed to have that, but I'm just throwing that out there. There are districts that have that because they're trying to emphasize who has the ability to put something that would be in a student's file.
Wouldn't it then make sense to say that the teacher has the ability to determine whether something is disruptive to the learning environment, but the administrator has the sole discretion to determine if there is to be any type of disciplinary action?
I just want to say something, and then Natalie and Dr. Green, that I think it's important that we're supporting the teachers, but we're a unified voice, so we're not, students don't feel, oh, I don't want to take that teacher because they interpret the HAT policy differently than this other teacher. So it's not a teacher that's saying, one teacher says this is okay and one teacher says this isn't okay. Ultimately, the responsibility lies on the school administrators who have the final authority. That's how I interpret it, but Natalie and then Dr. Green.
I think too, there just are different practices within, there's this policy, right? Like, does not interfere with the learning environment. That is carried out in so many different ways in so many different classrooms. So one teacher may think and that's with everything, with all policies that we have. What I like about adding the does not interfere with the learning environment is if a parent or a student is like, hey, what do you mean we can wear hats? Then you go back to policy and have that in there and say it affected the learning environment in the following ways. So I like that there's a little clause in there that adds to what D was before.
Dr. Green?
The only thing I'd go back to is giving a student a non-confrontational method to challenge whether what they're doing is right or wrong, and then providing a place for them to go rather than out the door. I mean, the wording of it, it seems it should reflect opportunity for student disagreement as opposed to being reflective of a authoritarian administrator that has all the power, because that doesn't appear to be what they're trying to do. But I'm flying blind here. I'm done.
I'm not sure if we're all saying the same thing. If there's a final recommendation here, we just have a mixed bags of thoughts that we're handing you. How do we? Oh, Tracy, please.
I was just going to add that I think because I assisted Dr. from my perspective, and I think the board's conversation about it says we should take another run at it, right? Because I think it could get lost in translation a number of different ways as people are interpreting it from their perspective. But the intention was not to get into debate, frankly, with students about what was disruptive, because this was extending greater permissions for wearing headgear and head coverings. We were trying to avoid the issues that you all described and that teachers described about what if a student is really abusing the privilege of headgear in a way that is disruptive or is violating some other rule. So we didn't want to have that debate between students where they were, there was some argument about whether it was or it wasn't. And so it's like with other things, as Dr. Putnam pointed out, in terms of other kinds of holding standards, the administrator is going to be the final arbiter of that. And it wasn't meant to discount the teacher's role in managing their classroom or raising those issues for review. It was really just meant to make sure that the administrator at the end of the day doesn't have to debate with a student if teacher finds that behavior is disruptive. But rewording probably is in order because obviously that sentence left alone by itself is creating confusion for folks.
Yeah, and sole discretion to me means you're the only one who has the discretion. Only the administrator has the discretion. You're taking it away from the teacher.
Yeah, and that's not the intention. I think that was with respect to the student. The student doesn't get to decide whether it's disruptive. The administrator at the end of the day gets to decide whether it's disruptive. And so I think I understand the point that board members are raising, and I think we can do a better job of languaging that.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. We're up for some second readings. First up, proposed revised board policy 707, transportation of public school students. This is the second reading presented by Gary Ganji, Executive Director of Operations.
Thank you. We do not have any additional revisions to recommend this evening.
Are we good to move on? All right. Then one more second reading with Gary. We have proposed revised board policy 709, which is student transportation for safety policy.
And again, we do not have any additional revisions to recommend this evening.
Scott, do you have a comment?
Yeah, could you put those policies up on the screen so I can at least see it? Have it?
Can you do that? Sure. These were the same ones that we reviewed last meeting.
I know, and I probably agree with you, but I want to see it.
Sure, all right. $709. Scott, this was the one where instead of health records being maintained on the school bus, that we struck maintained on the school bus and added readily available by dispatch. All right. Page 14. Huh? Just making me dizzy, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, moving on to reports. We have Superintendent by Willie Jett, Superintendent 742.
Good evening, Chair Hawes and members of the board. So first, our tech athletes finished strong at the Section 5 AA meet and several headed to the state tournament. In shot put, John Kaiser, and he took 6th place at state. At discus, Josh Russell. In the triple jump and high jump, Garrison Murray, and Garrison also took 3rd place in the high jump at state meet. And then our 4x400 relay with Andrew Gottwalt, Tegan Gatzik, Bjorn Maddock, and Eric Nicholas. They all qualified for state. Then some people are going to say, well, what about the north side? So I'm going to say Apollo athletes also finished strong at the Section 5 AA meet, with several headed to the state tournament, and the girls team came out in 2nd place at the section meet. State qualifiers. So first, Noelle Hackamueller, and you're going to have to give me a second because she has more than just a few events that she qualified for. So she got 2nd place in 100-meter hurdles. She got 2nd place in the 300-meter hurdles, and she took 9th place at the state meet. And she took 1st place in the long jump, and she took 3rd place at the state meet, and she took 2nd place in the triple jump. Excuse me, in the pole vault, we had 2nd place, Libby Lomo. She took 5th place at state. In the 800-meter run, Brooke Berkenes, she finished 2nd place. And in the triple jump, Tyler Hansen finished 2nd place and also took 6th place at state. And so this next one, I'm not sure. I haven't researched it, but it always happens. They always qualify. So I'm positive. The St. Cloud Crush adapted soccer team is headed to state. And I'm not sure when and I'm not sure where, but it's a fact. They always go. Next, Tech Junior Michael Plombon, the #1 seed in boys tennis, qualified to attend the state tennis tournament for Class 2A singles. And then I'd like to also say congratulations to Apollo 9th grader Ruben Henry Wagner, who participated in the 2022 Midwest Chinese Speech Contest with his speech about Minnesota cultural foods and the recitation of the Red-Crested Crane, which is a Chinese poem. On May 6th, finalists were invited to compete in a knowledge quiz and interview, and this young person won first place in his level. And he wanted us to note that his achievement was not possible without the help of some outstanding teaching staff here in District 742. And then Minnesota schools and districts were invited to apply for the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports Recognition System, PBIS. The purpose of the Minnesota PBIS recognition is to identify and recognize exemplar schools and districts that have completed PBIS implementation and are continuing to achieve positive student outcomes. District 742 and the following schools received this exemplary status. That's Clearview, Discovery, Lincoln, North, Oak Hill, and Westwood. And finally, I believe that this was recognized earlier, and somebody let me know this, but I didn't personally do it. So I would like to welcome Ms. Kay Nelson, our new Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, beginning July 1st. And that concludes my superintendent's report.
Thank you. Next up, we have Board of Education Standing Committee reports. We have 2 tonight. Natalie Copeland, Achievement, Integration, and Equity Committee.
Yes, we met this morning. We reviewed the year-long discipline data presentation, which will come to the board later this summer. We moved the curriculum purchase review discussion to August because we spent the rest of the time discussing a strategic plan. And we reviewed the presentation that's going to come before you in July, so I won't go over that. And we don't have a meeting in July, and we will be back on August 17th. That's all I have.
And then Al Dahlgren, Board Finance and Audit Committee.
Yep. Finance and Audit Committee met last Friday morning. We had 2 items on the agenda, and neither one need to be discussed here because the first one was the long-term facilities maintenance budget, which we had a discussion about, and the second one was lunch prices, which we had a discussion about.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to future agenda items. July board meeting topics will include Rotary Signature Project presentation, Discipline Data Year in Review presentation, Activities Update, Strategic Plan, Policy Readings. And at this time, does any board member want to suggest a future agenda item? Board Policy Development and Governance Committee will review requests and report on their recommendations. Ooh, yes. Monica?
I actually want to suggest a topic, but I'm not sure that it goes to the board governance committee. Might maybe go to just directly to the administration or to Natalie's committee. So, but what I wanted to learn better, I like to have an explanation, a presentation about how our district looks at rounded education for a well-rounded education for the students. And I had a conversation about this with Lori, so maybe Lori, I mean, you might know now better what I'm talking about, but we get the scores in math, we get the scores in reading, we get like subjects separate. But I wanted to understand better how our district, and this might be but for Lori Posh, how our district looks at formation of a young person looking towards the future, getting all the skills that an adult needs to have in a society, not only if they know how to read and write, but how are we exposing our kids to arts in the schools. Of course, that's important for me, but also in terms of reading and writing, and I don't know how long is it going to take you to do that, but that's what I would like to have as a presentation at some point.
Okay. Dr. Green?
Just to follow up on that, I go back to this wonderful presentation that I had from a teacher at South. And it goes to your question of well-rounded education. She was talking about what we teach students and in that how they take the series of things that we teach them and that they learn from us, and then how they convert that to things that we don't teach them, that they learn things and are able to make decisions and do things that we haven't taught them how to do. And that's the concept might be of well-rounded. And Shara Stone, by the way, is the person who made the comment, and it just had to do with the greatest value that they have as teachers is that kids learn things that from what we taught them that we don't teach them. And so that might be the part of that conversation. She might be able to lead that. She knows it. I mean, well.
So
Monica?
my question to maybe Willie or Lori is, where does this go from here? Where this should go from here?
So, Monica, you kind of asked this question when Donna was here. And the topic in that discussion item says comprehensive balanced approach to a district student assessment plan. The things that you're asking, that is what that committee, that is what that whole group is talking about. It's not just about assessments in math or science or reading or the arts. I had to get that shot in there, sorry. It's about a whole bunch of things. And everybody knows that I'm kidding when I say that to Monica, I hope. With that being said, that's what Donna's trying to get us to. She comes with experience from numerous places, and she's renowned throughout the state in that. And she sits with us at cabinet meetings, and she always tries to get us off the subject, or off, I'm not gonna say off topic, sorry, Donna. She always tries to get us to understand it's not just math, it's not just science, but it's about a well-rounded student and what it takes for that young person to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Oops. But anyways, that's what she always refers to, and that's the conversation that happens at cabinet that she's been spearheading, and that's that way that she phrased this in terms of that comprehensive balanced approach to district student assessment. That's what you're looking for, and that's what she's trying to get us to do.
Al?
This is a different one.
Oh, okay.
If people have questions on that one.
Yeah, I got it there. I think you're right. When I was in high school, we had to take music, either choir or band or orchestra, but you had to have music. And I don't think music is required anymore. We had to take some sort of art. Some kids are good in art, some kids are not, but it helped make a well-rounded student. Theater, maybe instead of an art class, you could take a theater class, but the idea is to get a well-rounded student that was more than just math and science and reading.
Okay. Al, did you have another topic you wanted to say?
Yeah,
Different
and I got to think about how I want to say this. I think, we have a new superintendent coming next month. And while we know that Lori has worked with Willie side by side for a few years, I think it's we have a little bit of an assumption that it's going to be just smooth sailing and Lori's going to step in and take over and everything is going to be the same as it is with Willie. But yet Lori is an individual herself and is going to take the district in the direction that she wants to take it, and not necessarily 100% in the direction that Willie has been taking it. And I think it's wrong for us as a board to assume that it's just going to be handoff to Lori and we won't even notice any difference in the way that the district and the direction of the district is handled. And so I think at some point this fall, we should have some, and it's not, not in July, but sometime this fall, we should have some type of either a retreat or a meeting where we as a board familiarize ourselves with Lori's direction and where Lori wants to take the district and priorities of Lori's so that we can all be on the same page, moving in the same moving in the same direction. So something along those lines. I mean, when Willie came, we had it because we almost immediately went into the building of the strategic plan. And there was a lot, that was where Willie set his direction for the district, and the board got on board with that. And he was able to do the things that he did because of that. And Lori needs that same opportunity as Willie, is what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. In some form or fashion, I think.
We have some form of a work session where the board and Lori can come together on priorities. So that we understand each other. And we don't just make an assumption that Lori's going to continue in 100% in the same direction as Willie has.
Natalie?
Can I just say, wait till you hear her present the strategic plan, because I got to know a little bit about her direction for the district, and it was great, so. Yeah, yes, and I'm just saying, we'll get to know it as we, next month.
Okay, thank you. Normally that's a wrap, but looky here, somebody snuck something into the agenda. I know, we said no parties. All right, last up, hopefully not too painful, recognition of Superintendent Jett's service to the St. Cloud Area School District 742. So thanks for enduring this, even though it was a no-no. On behalf of the school board, we wanted to present this plaque to you that says, with our greatest appreciation, we honor you, Willie Jett, Superintendent of District 742 from July 1st, 2013 to June 30th, 2022. Thank you for being an amazing leader, coach, role model, and friend. Your staff, students, parents, and the entire community have been strengthened by your vision, direction, and inspiration. Thank you very much. We appreciate everything you've done for us. I think yes, but I think we want to go around and say thank you. Is that correct? I think you get to be last. Go ahead.
So I don't really have anything prepared, Willie, but I will. I'm just going to say that, thinking back, so it's been 9 years now since you came to the district, and we hired a superintendent that hadn't been a superintendent before, so you're kind of getting something that you don't really know. It doesn't have a track record yet, and we were hopeful of the fact that you were going to be a strong superintendent. And I think we waited till about the third day to test you the first time, where we had a fire. And that fire really set a tone for you and your administration. The way that you handled it, there was no panic, there was calm. And it kind of set the tone that we know that Willie Jett is a superintendent who's the kind of the calm in the middle of the storm. And you're not going to get a panic, misdirected, jumping to fast conclusions and things like that. Yet you skillfully directed the district through that, and it wasn't easy because you had an entire early childhood building that had no home and needed to have space within the district. And I think at that point in time, we went back out to the old Kennedy and we put some classes at Discovery. But you did it, and there was just very, very little disruption. And then in the meantime, built a new school in Quarryview, so that we have one of the premier early childhood centers in the state. You were able to pass a high school referendum. Second try, but it passed, and that's not an easy thing to get passed in any community. And it's something that's going to have an impact on St. Cloud for the next 100 years or more. You know, that's a huge, huge thing, and you can already see how it's changed. I mean, that decision, Willie, and you can already see how it's changed just in the way that the city is developing, and the way they're building roads, the way that houses and apartments are going up, and where they're going up. It has a lot to do with that decision that was made about that high school that you directed and were able to get completed. Had that not happened, it would be a different community. So you were able to change a lot of things. It's just been an amazing thing. And then just from the standpoint of education, you rewrote how we provide education within this district. And again, you did it with very calmly, with very little disruption, with very little pushback from the community or the staff. But we have an entirely different model now that is so much stronger than what we had 9 years ago. And that's because of the things that you brought to us, and you were the right person for the job at that time. And you know, I'm so glad that we picked you. And I think on there it says that, you know, when it's listing out the things, it says the very last one listed is that you managed to be a friend. And I can honestly say that I look at you as a friend, all of those things. I see that from you, but you truly are a friend and treat every single person on this board as a friend. And I truly appreciate that. I don't know what you're going to go on and do. I have a hard time seeing how someone can go from a job where you are on call 24/7, 365 days a year, and probably working 12 to 15 hours a day, to where, hey man, I ain't got nothing to do today. That's a big transition. And so I have a feeling somewhere in there, you're going to go out and you're going to continue to make a difference in people's lives and kids' lives, and I appreciate that.
So I've said these things before about you, so it won't be totally new. But the thing I appreciated the most about how you led is the work-life balance. I had no work-life balance about 5 years ago, starting my own nonprofit, and coming into this as well. You know, it was just like, let's do all the things. And you always brought it back to how's your family doing, how's your kids doing. You would talk to me about your kids. You know, it's again that friendship part that you cared about us more. You care about us more than just as seats on the board, but really as people. And I see that throughout the district as well, and that's a beautiful thing. I think people can take a lot of like leadership classes, right? And like go on a leadership retreat from somebody who's made a bunch of money, and they're going to tell you how to make a bunch of money, and you're trying to learn from them in this 3-day retreat or whatever. But I have gotten a leadership retreat for the past 4 years from you, and the check's in the mail. But the difference in my leadership today in the community and here on the board, I owe a lot of that to you. And it's a calmer leadership than it once was, not all the time, but sometimes. And so I really echo what Al said as well, that the calm leadership style is, I guess it's okay. There's a Korean proverb that says the deeper the waters are, the more still they run. And that's, I think, where I've seen your calmness come from is that you're not, flighting about, that there's something very grounded about you, that you know who you are and you know who you want us to be, and you know what you want the kids to be able to do in this district. So thanks for that grounding, thanks for the deep waters, and thanks for the leadership training.
So Willie, I didn't know about the calmer leadership from Natalie, so I gotta thank you for that too. So I didn't know I had to add that to my list of things. Thank you so much. I think that this is great that we start with Al and we're going to finish with Les because they are the board members to receive you here and have to look at a whole bunch of applicants here and select you. So I got to thank them too. And of course the board at that time. I got the easy part of the work because you were already here, and I got to enjoy your tenure being here and being a board member with such a good superintendent as a complete person. The one thought that came to me when talking about this was that day that you went to Belle Claire to talk to the kids in my after-school program, and how easy it was for me to ask you, could you please come and talk to this group of kids? And I don't think that you told me, talk to my secretary or anything else. I think that you said right away, yes, let's schedule it. Let's put it in the calendar. And I put the time that they could, and you just make it work. And I know that you are busy. I know that was making a priority, and that's how I have seen you lead with kids in front. And we continue to say that, and you continue to remind us that we do all this because of kids and for the kids. And I hope that we continue to remember that, and during the time that you're going to leave us here with Lori and with everybody else. Thank you for the team that you have built. And also remembering that, and I think that should be our head and our thought moving forward. Thank you, Willie.
Kind of build off that. So here's some flashbacks of Willie's words when he was shortly hired. Of course, he was humbled by the opportunity, surprise, surprise, and still, don't let that humbleness slow you down. You can run around free now, okay? Brag a lot. And just kind of what I wanted to point out there about approaching the students. So leadership of we, and he was quoted this is shortly after you were hired, it's a we approach. It's never about me. It's always about a student and what's in the best interest of students and young people, and what are we going to do together to benefit young people. So I think you lived up to that and set an extraordinary example that our entire community will be benefiting from for a generation or so. So thank you. Of course, from an article, we kind of came on the scene at the same time. I don't know if you remember the forum. It's you, me, the new police chief, all at once, a bunch of fresh people, and I'd say you're at the top of all those new people by far. So thank you for sticking with us and for leaving us in good shape.
I've discovered you're quite the storyteller. And I think that this calmness that you project has something to do with your military background of being at Annapolis. To get into Annapolis, that's amazing. And I think that you went on to better things, but it made an impression on you, and it made you strong. And maybe this quiet, dark person and that would sum everything up at the end of the meetings. But and I've never really seen you discipline anyone. whatever you're doing behind closed doors and not embarrassing anyone. I think that's, I don't know if that's from the military or what, but it's a quiet thing. And people appreciate not being ridiculed in public. You're a good man. Thank you.
I was on the team that hired Mr. Jett, and it was interesting. I forgot about the fire. And
Fires.
well, yeah, the fires. We wondered who was setting them at some point. But I think what the tone that was set at that meeting, because I was there with the staff and Willie, and first got to see him in action, and it was a very, very emotional time for all of those early childhood teachers. And the question was asked, will we have input into the plan? He said, no. You're going to help me plan this thing, is what he said. And they kept saying, are we going to have input? And he kept saying, you're not listening. You're going to help me plan this. This is not my deal. This is our deal. And that came out of that, and I think you won the hearts of a great number of people who were used to being shuffled all over the place and put here and there and whatever. And then also the point that you said to them, when they kept asking, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And it was like, well, let's think about what we should do. And, they were naming this place and that place. And he said, maybe we should build something. Sort of hush went over the room. And so it was interesting to watch that operate. The second thing is that, in my opinion, he only had one shot at tech because the first time he ran the agenda was when I was chair of the board, and he gave me my marching orders, which was to sit in the room and nod my head and don't say anything, because he had gotten, he sort of figured out what the community needed. They needed him to be the leadership and not the board. And so regardless, that got done. And the concept of calm is to create the perception. Don't believe in any way, shape, or form that man is calm. You know what they say about those ducks? They're just sitting on top of the water, but them feet are going like that. So that was it. I've enjoyed this run with you, and it's been a learning experience for me also. And I got an opportunity to just kind of be crazy sometimes, because you were around to sort of, in the neighborhood, we used to call it pulling somebody's coat. When they were out of line, hey, so it was a great time, and I think everything that people have said about you is very true, and more so that you have ratcheted up this district and this area and the community in general to a new level of leadership and integrity, you knock on somebody's door at 8 o'clock at night, and the student comes to the door and says, "What are you doing here? You're having a problem in school, and I want to talk to your parent." I don't think that girl ever forgot that. But thank you for your service. Oh, and one more point. I know he has to be calm because he went to Annapolis and he can't swim.
The Naval Academy.
He went to the Naval Academy and he can't swim.
Yep.
I just want to ask for your forgiveness because we couldn't get your permission to do this. So now
There you go.
so please forgive us. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you. The permission piece, everybody in this room knows celebrations and goodbyes and all that kind of stuff, yuck for me. And so thank you for honoring my wishes. And I have a couple things to say, and so I actually had to write it down because I didn't know if I'd get choked up, because you guys know I'm kind of weak, especially as of late, and so I wrote them down. So the last few weeks, I've had this overwhelming feeling of gratitude. So here goes. First, to the exec team, and I spoke to them this morning, but I've said it repeatedly and I'll say it again. You flat out have skills, and this community is lucky to have your creative, professional, and committed expertise. To the entire staff in District 742, I would like to say thank you for what you do. Your dedication and your passion for the young people and their families in this community is beyond reproach. To the families, I'd like to say thank you for entrusting and partnering with us in the education of your most valued possession, your child. And to the students, I'd like to say thank you for putting a smile on my face, joy in my heart, and providing me daily with a sense of purpose and my why. Didn't know I'd get choked up on that part. So now to the Board of Education. I have a few things to say to you. So I'd like to thank you for supporting and empowering me, the exec team, and all of the staff throughout District 742. I'd like to thank the Board of Education for your commitment to District 742, and more importantly, your unwavering commitment in providing access and opportunity to all students. And I want to emphasize all students within our district. I'd like to thank the Board of Education for allowing me to be part of your team, this team, a family, a group of that's committed to excellence. And finally, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to, and expecting me to be a dad. It is without doubt that I've been blessed, and District 742 will always hold a special place in my heart. Thank you.
Okay, now that's a wrap. Meeting is adjourned. It is 8:43 p.m. We will not be back until July 20th. So thank you for watching. Have a good night.
There's cake back here. And Willie, those flowers are yours. You can do what you want with them.
Tried hard to get the school colors.
Tried hard to get orange and blue.
That's what was in season, I guess.
I can see it. I can see it.
Close to that.